Good evening, everyone. It's Michelle Olshan here, and this is our fourth session in CSM013, Case Management Facilitation and Review. I hope you all had a good week, and welcome to tonight's class. It's our fourth and our final session for this particular unit. Before we begin, though, I need to let you know, I need to make an announcement that tonight is my last class with you and with Hader. Next week, you will be having a new teacher, and that this new teacher is currently working in the sector and is very much looking forward to meeting you. My time with Hader is now coming to an end. I did want to say that in terms of the discussions, I think there's been some confusion, which I apologise for, around the role plays. We've been in discussions and in planning around role plays and a suggested schedule I forwarded to my supervisor. And those role plays now and that suggested schedule that we discussed, the times that suited you around the afternoon times or perhaps an evening, I have forwarded that. That will now be picked up by your new trainer moving forward to put those things in place. So if there was any confusion about that or any inconvenience, my apologies to you. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know personally, sort of, and in respect to you that, for personal reasons, I'm moving on from Hader, and you will be having a new trainer to start your new unit next week, which I believe, I'm not exactly sure what the new unit is, to be honest. I know I had it written down, but I'm not so certain what it is at the moment. So you will be starting a new unit with a new trainer who is currently working in the sector and will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience, I'm quite sure, to your classes moving forward. Okay. Okay. Welcome to everyone. Nice to see you all. It's always good to see a screen full of faces. Here, hello, Johanna. How are you? What I'm going to be doing now is bringing up the screen with reiterating the support contacts with my name off. If you wanted to take a screenshot of that, any contacts, any information that you might need or questions you have around work placement, please contact Clodagh Carmody. And any support around enrolments or anything or IT, please contact the learner support team. You can contact them directly by telephone 03 8362 3113, or you can contact them through the main info email, info@haderinstitute.edu.au or edu.au, or you can contact them at lso@haderinstitute.edu.au. Okay, and that will get you to the learner support team. If you want to make a time to speak with a trainer in a one-on-one phone call, learner support phone call, you can go into Calendly directly and book yourself in for a half-hour time slot with the trainer to discuss anything that you need, or you can ring the learner support team and ask to be booked in to speak with the trainer for a half-hour support phone call, and they will ring you. Okay. Any questions around that? You all good with that? I do recommend that every now and then you book in to just do a bit of a quick chat and a recap with the trainer, just to clarify things, just to sort of check in. I think it's probably a good idea. So before we begin, as we know, with the content covered in community services, sometimes it can be confronting, sometimes it can be uncomfortable, and it can be sensitive for some people, depending on what our experience in life has been. I think, yes, cool.
Yeah, I tried to book in for this one-to-one session and I couldn't find any date for the May. Um,
Okay. I think ring them directly, cool. Other people have said that too.
yeah,
And so, because one reason could be that most teachers are working part-time, okay? And so
okay.
they might only see, for instance, I was only working part-time, and so I was only available to do learner support calls. My availability was just 4 hours a week. And so it can get booked up fairly quickly. And that's why I encourage you to talk with any trainer. People are booked in over the week,
Yeah.
have their bookings available over the week. And all trainers, as part of the work that we do here, make our learner support phone calls to people who are booked in to to our schedule to ring up and support. And so I recommend that if you can't get into the person who you particularly want to, then ring Hader directly and request that they book you in with the trainer who is available now or who
All
is
right.
available shortly.
Yeah, all right.
Okay,
Thank you.
because people can get booked up fairly quickly, because we're not, there's only particular times, we have windows of availability. And so they can be booked up quite quickly. But don't let that deter you. I recommend that you speak to any trainer. Everyone is highly skilled, knows what they're doing. And and they can refer you if they can't answer a question directly around, then they will find out.
All right. Thank
So,
you.
okay. All right. Um, so we'll go back to this. Take a screenshot if you like. It's a good thing a good resource to have. And, you just do the audit, the audit with yourself. Where am I at on a scale 1 to 10 or, 0 to 100 in terms of my stress levels or distress levels? Where am I at? What sort of self-care might my rating, my personal rating, be? What sort of self-care might be required? Given the fact, and use this, remember this when you're working. In your professional life, it is always really good to keep a check on, life is busy, stuff happens, our work, we are dealing with intense situations, we're dealing with things that can be quite sad sometimes. So we're dealing with things that can be emotional and can be stressful. So it is always really important to keep a finger on the pulse, on your own pulse, in terms of what are my stress levels, anxiety levels, or distress levels like? Where might I rate them in terms of that scale 1 to 10? And if necessary, take appropriate action to find support for yourself. Self-care is actually really very, very critical. So, keep track of anything that you might find triggering to you and your sense of well-being, and seek support if you need to. It is precisely the advice that we would provide to our clients, and sometimes we need to take it ourselves. It is part of the profession that we're in, and life can get very complex and very busy sometimes. So reach out to any of these phone numbers: the mental health line 1800 011 511, 13 Yarn 13 92 76, Lifeline 13 11 14, or Beyond Blue 1300 22 46 36. There is also the app from Beyond Blue that's called Beyond Now, and you can download that and put it on your phone. It's actually a really good recommendation for you to take as a resource um, when you're working, that you can provide that um, you can provide that information to your clients. It's a really good handout card to have, but just also people can just download it onto their phone if that's what they want to do. So self-regulation is the ability to understand and manage your behaviours and your reactions to feelings and things happening around you. And in our line of work, it's actually really, really critical that we do it for ourselves. And it's also really critical in terms of the support that we provide to our clients that we have. Now we are moving on to our fourth and final session of CSM013, which is we're focusing on case management meetings. So I'm going to bring up the slide and let's make a start. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we work, study and live and pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We celebrate the stories, culture and traditions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders of all communities who also work and live on this land. We acknowledge elders past, present and emerging and pay our respects to them. And for anyone here who identifies as First Nations, welcome to you. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at tonight is meetings and the case management cycle. And so we're going to be looking at all these things listed here. Meetings, protocols and processes. There are protocols and processes involved in meetings. A good meeting is a planned meeting, and a good meeting is a quick meeting, some people would say, but sometimes they're not quick meetings, but they do need to be planned. We'll be looking at communication skills for facilitating meetings. So if you're chairing a meeting and you're the one who's running it, then there are certain communication skills that you will learn over time, but things to keep in mind if you're new to running meetings. We'll be looking at planning case management, choosing a case management approach. We'll be looking at complex case management and also monitoring, reviewing and evaluating. And this is particularly important, so take notes, because one of your assessments is to run a meeting. So let's talk about meetings. I'm sure some of you have been involved in meetings. Who's been involved in meetings? Who's been to a formal work meeting before? Okay.
Me.
Some people have, not everybody has. Who's actually facilitated or chaired or been involved in actually organising and running a meeting, a formal work meeting before? Yep. Okay, so this is new for most of you by the look of it. It's a good skill to have. When you work in community services, you're going to be going to meetings, right? You'll be going to all sorts of meetings. You'll be going to team meetings, you'll be going to those meetings. But in the context of case management is a particular kind of a meeting where the meeting is around your client and other stakeholders or other people, services and people who are connected to your client and what your client's needs and priorities might be would be involved in that meeting in some way as well. They could have support workers there or a close friend. They could have a carer there. So somebody who is in their corner personally, right? But then might also be other people from other agencies involved in a meeting. And in a case management meeting, you're there with the client at the centre. So it does need planning. Okay, let's go back to it. So your role as a case manager, I'm still letting people in, includes facilitating formal and informal meetings. So formal meetings are really around, just what I said, where you do call people, there are participants who are coming to that meeting, you have planned it, you have an agenda, so a list of things that you need to discuss that people have either contributed to that list of things that they want to discuss. There might be particular topics or what have you. It's a formal meeting, minutes will be taken. You have to book a room, have a location that is going to fit everyone in, and it's a suitable location where there is a table, people sit around a table that they can write and discuss things, and it's a quiet space. There are also informal meetings where could be with a colleague or with your client, where you're having, just a one-on-one, informal meeting where there might not be a formal agenda. You're just talking about a topic, or you're catching up, or just shooting the breeze about something, but still there is information shared. And they still can count as meetings. And so you can have formal meetings with your participants and your clients. You can also have informal meetings as well as part of the case management process. The degree of formality will depend partly on the context. So it will sort of depend on the purpose of the meeting. So if you find that in your case management process, you're at the beginning of a... Yes, Johanna?
I have a question about the meetings.
Yeah.
Which one is formal meeting and which one is informal? What is the difference?
Formal is when you have an agenda, which means you have a list of topics that you want to discuss. You call the meeting and you set a time, you set a date, you set a time, and you set a location. You identify the people that you want to be at the meeting or people who need to be at the meeting. You write up an agenda for the meeting, which is all the topics that you want to discuss at that meeting. And you send that agenda out to each of the participants who you're inviting to the meeting. And then the meeting is formally chaired. So if you're chairing the meeting, that means that you're running the meeting. So people will look to you. There's a formal process that is taken to run that meeting. So you would open the meeting, just say your meeting was at 2 p.m. People would arrive for that meeting. Maybe your meeting goes for 2 hours. You'd be very clear about the purpose of the meeting. And so you would be the one who is formally opening the meeting and running the meeting, keeping an eye on the time, listening to the discussions, moving the discussions along, right? Going through each agenda item and raising each one. So you do a discussion around one topic, you finish that, you move on to the next topic, and then you discuss that, you finish that. You're the one who is regulating the time and moving things along. So you're the one who's in charge if you're chairing it. Minutes are taken in a formal meeting, which means that notes are taken about everything that is discussed. So if there are any decisions made at a meeting, those will be, and normally that is why you have meetings. You discuss things, you decide if any actions need to be taken, and you would write those down. So they're called minutes. And then the minutes would be typed up, and then they would be sent to everyone who went to the meeting. That's a formal meeting. Informal meeting is where you might sit with a colleague or with your client and just have a discussion, and it hasn't necessarily been planned, but you are sharing information. And if you are sharing information about a client or with your client, you wouldn't necessarily have minutes about that meeting, right? But you might have file notes. You might need to make a note of that particular meeting in that client's file notes so that there's a record of it. So that's the difference between a formal and an informal meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. And the degree of formality really depends on the context. So in a case management process, if you were starting the case management process around a client, then that you might start with an informal meeting with your client just to gather some information, get to know them, start that relationship of trust and building rapport and finding out from your client, what are your priorities? What are your needs at the moment? What are your priorities? And then you might have a discussion with your client around, okay, we've got an idea of what your needs and your priorities are. Perhaps I can invite, perhaps it would be good to invite some agencies to refer or help with this process. So just say you had a client who was a young person, just say, who was at risk of being homeless or was rough sleeping and they needed housing. Perhaps a housing agency would be a good person for you to connect to. Perhaps, they might have mental health issues. Perhaps a mental health worker or an agency, a service that provides mental health support or counselling, perhaps they would be good connect to as well. So you gather people around the table who can provide a service to support the needs and priorities of that client that they've identified in terms of what kind of support they want.
Michelle?
So you might, yeah.
Sorry, my name is Danny. This is the first class I've been able to participate. So I work in an agency. I've been in meetings with DCJ, and I'm house manager and have to organize team meetings constantly. Would you call? Yeah. So, for example, I have to do supervisions with all my workers.
Yeah.
Would that be formal or informal? Would you call?
Supervision, I would say supervision is a formal meeting. There is a record kept of supervision, yes.
Yeah.
And that's correct. Meetings like that with information sharing, any sort of discussions that were had, any goals or any directions or any decisions that were made, I would consider that would be, a formal kind of thing, and a record would have to be kept of that. Record keeping is critical in our line of work. You would keep records, Danny, yeah? You keep records? Can't hear you. Your sound is gone.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, can hear you now.
Yeah, I was saying that yes, I do document everything so that then we can follow up the next month and see where we stand, how we have got closer to the goals, or how we can work, and how the worker is feeling as well.
Yeah, I would see them as formal meetings. I mean, I just think of the times that I've been, working, and I think I've had informal meetings like coffee chat.
Yeah.
And you have a coffee chat with someone. You might even have a coffee chat with a client, and that's, just touching base. That could be touching base. How are you going? Did this work? What have you? So you don't need necessarily, it's an informal thing. You're still sharing information. You're touching base. You're connecting. You're communicating. You're sharing information. With a client, you might actually jot it down on their case file. Saw John today, had a quick coffee, doing really well, and that's it. Put the date and your signature, and that would be okay. I would call that an informal meeting. But other people might have a different view. But that's the distinction for me, where
Can I clarify something?
Yep.
So for example, I think I may have stuffed up in this case now that you've said that. So
I don't think so.
No, I've had a number of I guess informal chats with different clients and stuff like that when it's done in a park or whatever. I haven't documented those down.
Well, now let's not freak out about this, right? I don't want anyone to be alarmed. My thought around that, Danielle, is that check in with your work about that, because organisations, as we've talked about before, organisations have got policies and procedures around their record keeping requirements. Okay, we know that by law records have to be kept, but organisations will have their own record keeping requirements, and as long as you're working with your organisation's policies and procedures, then that should be fine. So just check in. It could well be that your organisation or another organisation, because we deal with so much information all the time, it could well be that they have a distinction. And they have a distinction between, okay, we need records of formal meetings, the minutes, to be attached, okay, but we, informal meetings, catch-ups, what have you, not necessarily.
I think if there's any concerns or any things that's alarming, then yes.
I
But
would say so, because you must remember too, and I'm just raising this, we have a duty of care to our clients all the time. If we're connecting to our clients, formally or informally, right, in the context of our work and our position as a worker, then my thought would be then aligning with our duty of care, probably always good to be erring on the side of caution.
okay.
And just taking a bit of a note. If you felt that, there was it offered some clarity around, or it was tracking someone's behaviour, you're not tracking behaviour, but it's giving you bumped into somebody or what have you, and it's worthwhile taking a note of how that person presented, right? And you've got that recorded. If something comes up later on and you've got it recorded, clients seem to be going well on this, or, client was really quite agitated. I mean, if it's outside of a meeting time, then it could well be that your organisation has protocols that says you don't need to do that.
Can I suggest something?
Yeah.
This is for Danielle, I think. Something that I have learned in my experience is that for your own sake, document as much as you can, maybe not so detailed necessarily all the time, but then you have your backup, because everything can come back to you, and you can even say, or somebody can say that meeting never happened. And you have like a little detail, what Michelle was saying, like a little detail of like, today we met in this place at this time, we spoke about this and everything went well. And that's
good to know, because I've literally just bumped into this person and all of a sudden we've got in this conversation. So
and if you haven't done it, you can still back forward and say the days that you did meet.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Danny, for that. And it's a good discussion to have, because I think, those things that you need to be mindful of is duty of care. If anything happened and you were ever investigated, your organisation was ever investigated because you had a connection to that client, right? And it turned out that, yes, you did connect to that person, but there was no record of what have you. It's best practice and good practice and risk management to document things as much as what you can. And you don't have to go into great detail, but it could well be just that you write it down, put the date, the time, and the place, as Danny says, write in the note and sign it and date it and put it in the client's file.
Yeah, sadly, even though we have good intentions, things can be recorded, and then if you don't have backup, you're gone.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And you have a responsibility to yourself as well as to your organisation and also to your clients. So it's a duty of care thing. Okay, we all good with that? I might move on if that's okay. So what we have talked about beforehand is that meetings, case management meetings, are a collaborative process, that we seek cooperation and consensus wherever possible. So we discuss things with our client, certainly with our client's input and with their consent. This is about a case management meeting is around, hopefully you've identified some, what the issues are for your client at that particular time that brings them here to your service, what their issues are, what the main areas of concern are as they are, what they think they are and what they agree that they are, and also what their priorities are in terms of moving forward. What are their goals? So if you've got an idea of that and you've started that discussion with your client, then that's good. And in terms of bringing in other agencies or other stakeholders, you're bringing them in to collaborate around a plan for the benefit with your client. So everything is, in agreement and in consensus with your client. So that would be the main aim. The case conference is where is a meeting which we've talked about, we just mentioned before, between the key participants. So it would be with you as your case manager, with your client, perhaps with your client's support person or a friend or a carer or what have you. If they would like somebody in that meeting, it is a good idea sometimes to do that, but that is their choice. And also, if there are other agencies, key agencies that are providing services that are supporting your client's case plan moving forward and goals moving forward. So a case conference is where those people come together. You hold it to clarify issues, to review progress, to clarify and map out roles and responsibilities between particular people, to resolve any conflicts or misunderstandings, perhaps to make changes, to develop any solutions to problems that might arise. You know, perhaps you had made agreements around something, or your client had, and it just hasn't worked out that way. Something needs to be reviewed. You know, that happens. You know, so it's also around, you know, introducing changes to case management plans and services. And so you would have those discussions in consultation with your client and with the key stakeholders from other services, as well as their support person or people, to clarify those things, check in on those things, and make decisions about where to from here. So the case conference could include internal and external service providers and workers, family members or advocates. So what we call that is a multidisciplinary team, right? So workers from different disciplines or different work areas in community services. So, for example, as you know, I said before, you may have a client who is at risk of homelessness or has, you know, or is homeless, sleeping rough. You may have a service agency there who is, you know, provides a counselling service, or a mental health practitioner. You might have, because perhaps your client needs support around mental health issues. You might also have a service there who is a housing agency, for example. But, you know, you might have, if you're working in another area, you have a client who perhaps has, you know, legal issues surrounding family and domestic violence, for instance, then it could well be that you might need a legal representative there, because perhaps that person needs to have some legal support, and, you know, it could be good for that person to have a legal representative. So it really depends on your client's needs and what their priorities are at that time. And in consultation with your client, you would make suggestions around, okay, who needs to be involved in this, in your case plan, to help move your goals forward. So you can hold a meeting face-to-face where everybody comes to the one location, or you can have a video or teleconference, you know, a Zoom meeting like this, where people can just, you know, stay where they are and Zoom on in. So it really depends on the circumstances. But I would say one of the key things around a case management meeting is very likely, because we'd actually sort of discussed before the reality that when people attend, you know, present to community services these days, it's not just with a single issue. People come with complex issues these days. That is the norm. So it is very likely that if somebody needs a case management approach, and a case management approach is something that is much more usual these days for some clients, then you're going to have people from different disciplines, different areas, a multidisciplinary team, which is coming around, wrapping services around that client. So in the example of a victim survivor of family and domestic violence, right, it's very likely there would be, you know, perhaps, you know, counselling, family counselling, housing services, legal services, perhaps a GP or health services as well. There might be coming around those services, wrapping around that client. So it's a multidisciplinary team. Danny, you've said that you do case management yourself. Anything that you can share with us around your
I
experience?
actually don't do case management. I'm a house manager of an agency. I have to do case management, supporting the caseworker that manage the kid that I care for. So, for example, at the moment, I care for a girl. She's 16. She lives in a residence by herself. It's a therapeutic environment. We are trained in TCI, therapeutic intense care. And I have 20 workers that are in constant rotation with active nights caring for this girl. So I have weekly meetings with DCJ, clinicians, and the parents that are involved as well.
So can I just ask you, when you have weekly meetings with all of those people who are connected to your client, the 16-year-old girl, do you bring them all together to have meetings, or do you have individual meetings with them?
Normally we will bring them all together unless there's a specific target. Like, for example, at the moment we are trying to diagnose the level of mental health or disability that the young girl has. So Elder has been getting involved, which is like an extra institution of mental health that is supporting the case.
Okay.
But so that meeting is separate to that specific weekly meeting.
Okay. So can I just, because it's really helpful to, I mean, it makes it real. It is real, right? You're talking about, and that makes all the difference. I can talk about this, but then you're doing it. So if we can sort of draw on your work, that would be just really, I would imagine that would be really good. Makes it real for people. So your client, of course, we're going to protect people's privacy and confidentiality. So we're just talking very high level here. You have a client who has particular needs, and so she has her support people that are with her at a meeting. Right.
So she has she has two safe person in the house.
Two safe people in the house.
She consider her safe people. Apart, we have all the other workers that she trusts, and some she's starting to get to know. She's very I don't want to use the word, but like picky. So she's very, she has ASD. So she's very like determined who she likes, who she doesn't.
So she's very clear about her decisions around her preferences. So in terms of services, linking the services in, what services come around the table in her case management meeting that you run?
Well, Elder is one. Elder school.
Oh, so school. Yep. So there's a welfare from school.
Yeah.
Yep. Who else?
Elder, ELVER.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like if it's an agency, I don't need to know the actual name.
Oh,
so you have you have a school representative. What other agency would come? Do you have somebody from a disability agency?
So with this particular girl, no, but in the house that I was managing before, we do have William Campbell was an external agency that was supporting the caseworking. We have the school. We have.
So you have the school. Do you have a mental health worker?
We have a mental health worker. Yes.
Right. Do you have a
clinician? A clinician that is in developing her BSP plan. Yep.
And what plan is that? Sorry.
The behavior support plan.
So that clinician, are they like a psychologist? Are they?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have a mental health worker. You have a psychologist. You have and we won't go any further with that. I just want to get the idea. You also have the school, and she also, and your client also has her two safe people. So and that gives you an idea.
PCYC. PCYC is also involved.
Okay. So that, right. Thank you. That just gives you an idea from somebody out in the field of what a case meeting might look like for a client. That every week, your colleague here has a meeting with these agencies who are involved in his client's life to support her plan moving forward. And they're what we call a multidisciplinary team. And in this particular client's situation, because of their age, and school is a big feature, there's somebody from the school, a mental health clinician, a psychologist, and two safe and other people as well. And also the two safe workers or two safe people in her life who are her personal supports. That gives you an indication. And that is probably sort of the model that, for a case management meeting, generally speaking, that is what you would be looking at. You would be looking at your client in the middle, the support people who they choose, and other agencies who have a vested interest, they're stakeholders in this person's life, by providing the services required to support this person to achieve their goals. And that's what your case conference or your case management meeting might look like. That's who would be there. Not necessarily those ones, but agencies. So when we look at case management meetings, there is a process to follow. And here's some basic principles. The first one is to plan. Okay, so let's say you are the case manager. Then you need to plan your meeting. You're going to call this meeting together, which has got the client there, and they're two, just say they're one or they're two support people, and perhaps three other agencies who are providing supports to them. Perhaps there's a mental health practitioner, perhaps there's a housing agency, and perhaps there's legal aid. Who knows? So let's just go with those. So let's just say there's those ones. You need to have a clear purpose of what the meeting is for. So it could be, your purpose could be that it's an initial meeting and you're setting up a plan. So it could be it's the first meeting and you're introducing your client. First time people are meeting together, they've reviewed the documents or the files because your client has given permission for that, and they're coming together for the first time, and perhaps your meeting is to start mapping out a plan, right? Making it really clear what the goals are, making it clear, okay, what is the role that every agency has got here? What services are they going to provide to that person? What's their role in relation to your client? And if they're going to be having separate meetings with them, so perhaps you've got somebody, for example, from legal aid, and the legal aid person says, yes, I can see that so-and-so needs some support around, some legal advice. And so I suggest that we make a time to meet next week. So it's really clear, what that person's role is, and you've discussed that, and the action might be that they're going to be making time. You'll probably go around the table and get really clear about what the role is of every agency there in relation to your client. What service are they going to be providing to that client, and where are they at now with it? That's in an introductory meeting. If you start to sort of develop that plan where you've got an action, okay, the legal aid, we're going to set up a meeting around legal advice because there's a court hearing coming up. You might have the mental health practitioner to say, hey, we think we need to, we can provide some counselling here, and it would be really good for our client to start weekly counselling sessions, and we can start that from the end of this week. So that is an action there. That's a decision that's been made as well. You would discuss that with your client there. Is this something that you agree to? And you move on through each of the people who are at the meeting, the main agencies, providing the main services for your client. Get an idea about what service they're going to be providing for your client and what actions that they're going to need to take next. That could be the purpose of one meeting. You could have a meeting which is a progress meeting. So you might be bringing people together and, okay, we decided, you know, these are the agreements or decisions that were made at our previous meeting. This meeting is to check in on progress. How are things going? So you would go through everyone again. You could, I think a fairly structured approach is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So that could be the purpose of a meeting. You might, so the point is, be very clear about the purpose of the meeting. If it's to discuss and set up a plan, then be clear about that. If it's to monitor the progress of the plan, to check in and see, okay, we've got the plan in place, right? Let's just check in to see how things are going. And, you know, do things need to change? You know, be clear about that. Or do we need to review? Be clear about that. So be clear about the purpose of your meeting. And you need to prepare an agenda. So the agenda is all the topics that you're going to discuss. So, you know, you might have your introduction. People introduce themselves. First thing that you would do probably is an acknowledgement of country, because that is protocol that all organisations have. We do an acknowledgement to country. You would introduce yourself as the chair and you would introduce your client. You would probably then invite everyone to introduce themselves and explain who they were. And then you would proceed to, okay, this is why we're meeting today. So you do your welcome and your introduction. So you have number one, your acknowledgement. Number two, your welcome to everyone. And then number three, your introduction. And then number four, you would go into your agenda, each item on the agenda. For each agenda item, so an agenda item or an agenda is, it's a list. It lists all the topics or items of business that you want to discuss in the meeting, all the things that you want covered. You can't make it too long, it's just going to get too overbearing. People get tired. So, you know, you might have a few things that you might want to discuss. You might want to check in with each agency. Okay. So you need to work out whether an item is for a discussion only or whether a decision needs to be made. That's what you have an agenda for. It guides the meeting. It's the menu. The agenda is the menu for the meeting. That's what it is. It's a good idea, just if you're running the meeting, to actually put some time, put in brackets, I've always, against every item on the agenda, I've always put, you know, a number. I've given it some time. So if you're running a 2-hour meeting, you got to work out how much time do we have to discuss each of these things, because if you don't keep a handle on it, things can be blown out. They can go off on their own. And your role as the chair or the facilitator is to keep the discussion on track and to keep people moving along and to finalise the discussion when it's finished and move on to the next agenda item. If it looks like, so sometimes what I will do is against each agenda item, I'll put out 5 minutes for that, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. I'll go through the agenda and say, okay, folks, this is what we've got on the agenda. This is what we agreed to talk about, what people needed to, and this is how much time I've suggested that we have to discuss these items. How do you all feel about that? If people, sometimes it's happened where people will say, well, that agenda item, I actually think that we need to have more time for that because I've got a lot I want to say about that. So you might want to you know, revise that time. Okay, well, okay, we'll give that 10 minutes then, but that means we're probably going to take it off something else. Or it could well be that you sort of say, okay, actually, when it comes down to it, we're not going to have time for everything on the agenda. So I'm going to take the 2 bottom agenda items off. We'll hold it over for another meeting. But this probably won't happen in the meeting that you're doing. Right? Just have your agenda items, a bit of, you know, time allocated for each discussion, and leave it at that. But it's a good idea because it helps you to keep on track. With some meetings, sometimes depending on the meeting and depending on how many people you've got there, sometimes there will be a timekeeper. So you might, somebody might actually volunteer, or you might arrange for somebody at the meeting to keep an eye on the time and say, you know, just let you know, okay, look, you've got 1 minute to go. And sometimes that's how some chair people or some facilitators like to run a meeting, because it helps them to keep on track. What I'm going to do is bring up the main roles in a meeting. All righty, so let's have a look at this. So here we go. So there are 4 main roles in a meeting. Okay, first person is the chairperson or the facilitator. They lead and control the meeting. That's their role. And everybody, because every group has got to have a leader, okay? And everyone will look to the chairperson or the person who's running the meeting to keep it, you know, to manage it and to organise it and to keep it, you know, and the chairperson is the person who organises a meeting. And so you need to organise the agenda beforehand. You need to prepare everything beforehand, write the agenda and send it out to everyone who you've invited to the meeting. They need to get the agenda before the meeting. That is just meeting courtesy. That is one of the protocols of running a meeting. You also need to make sure you've got, when you go to a meeting, you've got a couple of spare copies of the agenda just to hand out. Okay, but that's protocols and courtesy of a meeting, that everyone has a copy of the agenda sent to them before the meeting. So the role of the chairperson is to lead and control the meeting. You keep the group focused on the discussion, because, you know, as I said, things can go off in terms of go off track, right? The discussion or the problem, right, that you might be discussing, and any solutions that the group decides on. So you might be discussing something, and then, you know, you sort of think, okay, we need an action around this. What are we going to do about this? Okay, it will be your role as the chairperson to say, okay, well, look, I'm just going to wind up the discussion now, and I think we need to come to a decision. What are we going to do about this? You know, and so that is your role, right? You keep the discussion on track, and then when you think that there's or you're out of time, you can say to people, I'm sorry, we're running out of time. We really need to come to a discussion, to an agreement. What do we agree on? What are the next steps? And you need to have that agreement or that solution and be clear that everybody understands that and agrees with it. In really formal meetings, the chairperson decides who can speak, and they keep you, but you do need to keep the discussion respectful. Right, so it is your job to monitor those discussions. The skills you're going to be using are active listening skills, and we'll talk about that later. So you need to keep that discussion respectful, ensure that everybody has the right to speak and that people's voices are heard and nobody feels like they're being talked over, or nobody feels like they're being disrespected, or that they're being shut down. Your job as the chairperson is to ensure that those respectful behaviours are abided by and agreed to by everyone, and that people do have the right to be heard and they have the right to express their opinions. And so, you know, you might want to say, okay, fine, you know, if somebody is talking a lot, we do sometimes, it happens in meetings sometimes that on a particular topic, somebody is a dominating voice, you know, you might need to come in as the chairperson or facilitator and say, look, thank you. You know, we've heard your we've heard your point of view, which is very valuable. Now, I just want to open it up for people to respond to that. Anybody else who's got a point of view. So that's how you manage it. And you're the one who's in charge of doing that in a respectful way. And if people are all on their good behaviour, and everybody should be on their good behaviour in meetings, they should.
Turn off the light. Turn it off. Turn off the light.
Sorry, right. Then that should be okay. I think people should have, generally speaking, I reckon people, when they come to a meeting, understand that this is the process of running meetings. So you support and you help where you can. The second, so that's the role of the chairperson. The second one is the minute taker. Minute taker is the person who documents everything about the meeting that's going on and discussed at the meeting. So sometimes you can arrange for somebody to be the minute taker beforehand, okay? Or you can call for a volunteer at the meeting to take minutes. But there's a particular job the minute taker does. The minute taker makes a list of who's at the meeting. So they will pass around a sheet of paper and everyone needs to sign in, write their name, they write their position and what organisation they're from, and they sign it. Okay, their signature. If you're online, right, then the minute taker would write down everybody's name and just make sure that you've got everybody who was at that meeting, that you've got a list, because they're all the people that you send the minutes to. So that's a job that the minute taker does. It's the attendance list. But it's not just names, it's their name, position, and the organisation they work with. The second thing they do is they take notes about everything discussed. And so you need to be organised as a minute taker. So every agenda item, everything that's listed there for discussion, you would write down the topic and underline it. And then you would jot down in note form what was discussed, right? The main things that were discussed. And then at the end, if there were any decisions made about that topic, or if there are any agreements made or any solutions, things that people say that they will do, you need to note those down and their actions. Okay, so you write down the notes of the discussion, and then what I always do is I write at the end action, right? And then I write down what the agreements were, and that finishes it off. Okay, we talked about it. This is what we said that we would do, and these are the people who said they would do it and when by. And then you would put that in as the action. At the end of the meeting, you also need to write down at the end, what the next steps are if there's going to be another meeting, or when the other meeting is going to be, and that would go at the end of the minutes. Next meeting, the date and the time and where. That's usually a discussion that is had at the end of the meeting. So you commit to when the next meeting is going to be, if you're going to have one, and you would include that as your last point in your minutes. And then your job is to type up all those minutes. So you write in the list of everyone who attended, and then you write in all the discussions around each agenda item, what the actions were for each agenda item, and when the next meeting when the next meeting is going to be. And then you would send those minutes out to all the people who attended. The third one, which not all meetings have, but some do, it's a bit of an old-fashioned role, but some meetings have them, depending on how big it is, but not often, really. But it can be helpful, a timekeeper. And a timekeeper can, basically, if you've got 5 minutes against a particular, you give them 5 minutes for a discussion point, it can help to have somebody in your corner who's going to give you, a bit of a nudge when you've got 1 minute left. If you've got a fairly full agenda and a tight meeting, you might want to arrange it like that so that you've got somebody who can say to you, you've only got 1 minute left, and you know that you need to wrap it up. So it really depends on what your meeting is about, how busy your meeting is, and whether you need that support, because it might be too difficult for you to keep an eye on the time yourself. Because that's the other thing you need to do as a facilitator and chairperson, is you're the one who's keeping an eye on the time. And also the fourth thing is the participants. The participants are everyone who's at the meeting, all the attendees. Participants can join in the discussion and they can vote on actions, okay? And sometimes, depending on how formal the meeting is, and again, it's a pretty old-fashioned thing to do, but sometimes some meetings still do it. Some facilitators still like to do it this way because that's how they want to run a meeting, is if they want to make a contribution or a discussion at the meeting, they'll put their hand up and say, can I speak? And the chairperson will say yes. Or the chairperson might say, actually, there's 2 people before you and you can speak after them. But most of the time, you know, people will just put their hand up and say, you know, I've got something I'd like to say, and that's okay. So, yeah, the participants are everyone is there. So the main meeting words are the agenda, which is list of topics to be discussed, the minutes, that's all the notes of the meeting, who was there, what the discussions were about against each agenda item, and what actions were agreed to. The attendees, all the people who attended the meeting, and apologies. Now, the apologies are people who were invited, but they couldn't come and they let you know they can't come. If you've invited somebody, they can't go, they email you and say, really sorry, can't make it, it will be noted in the minutes that they have apologised because they can't be there. And that's like a meeting protocol and a courtesy as well. So if you want to take a snapshot, if you would find it helpful to take a snapshot of that, then please do. Okay, what we're going to move on with, we'll have a break, and we'll move on with just the function of the meeting, the actual structure of the meeting. Okay, so let's take a break at 5 past. We'll come back at 15:15. Okay, have a stretch. I'll see you in 10 minutes. Yep, Charlie, I can see the thumbs up there. Yep, okay, let's move on. Righto. So these are the things we already went through that. So you've got a plan, you need to facilitate. So the chairperson, it's all on you. You've got to be organised. You've got to take the notes, you've got to conduct the meeting, and well, you've got to organise the note taker or the minute taker. You've got to run the meeting, make sure everybody is on track, that they've got the agenda, it all's running smoothly, people have the right to speak, that everybody's voices are heard, that you keep the discussion moving ahead. Sometimes facilitators will say at the beginning of a meeting, if we, you know, just put in some general understandings around behaviour, all of that, I think is okay, right? Set a standard and just sort of say, look, you know, I'm sure we're all on the, we all would agree that it's really important that everybody feels that they can have a say here. So please, let's just have one person talk at a time. And if you could just, you know, we need to get through the agenda. And so if we could keep things sort of short and sharp, that'd be really good. You know, meetings rarely turn out like that in terms of keeping things short and sharp, but sometimes they do. But it's perfectly okay to be setting those agreements, you know, at the beginning. Record and document. Absolutely, with your documentation, you do need to document a meeting. You do need to have a minute taker who takes an accurate record, written record, of the main notes and the main points that are discussed in the meeting and any actions or decisions that come out of that meeting and who the people are who's responsible for, you know, ensuring those actions or those solutions happen. Okay, and then, so there are regulations, your organisation would have policies and procedures around keeping records, and also there would be in terms of record keeping for case management anyway. Your organisation might have a particular policy around the whole process of case management and conducting case management meetings and the records that need to be kept. So you need to be familiar with all of those. It is for legal requirements and also ethical requirements. It is really important that everybody who attended that meeting and people who were invited but couldn't attend, so people who were an apology at that meeting, it's really important that they receive a copy of those minutes. It's like closing the communication, you know. So, and then you have to follow up the minutes and the records at the end when it's all done. So when it comes down to facilitating meetings, you're the chairperson, okay? And it's actually a real skill to be able to facilitate and chair a meeting. I don't think that any skills around it should be at all underestimated. And it's one of those old kind of adages that the more you do it, the better you get. And I think it's true. And I think it's one of those things that it can be a little bit daunting, but if there are opportunities for you to learn how to do it in your workplace, like start small, might be team meetings, and have a go. And then, it's a really good skills development activity, to be able to do that. In terms, it's important for you as a chairperson to be aware that there are group dynamics. Now, you would probably know this anyway, we sort of know, well, there's group dynamics, but, what are they? What are group dynamics involved in a meeting? And there's two main ones, okay? And it does come out. You will find it in a meeting. It will help you to facilitate meetings effectively if you're aware of these dynamics that happen, because you might be able to pinpoint it in your case management meeting with the people who are there. So there are two processes or functions that are usually going on in a meeting. There are maintenance functions. Okay, the maintenance functions are about they're directed at establishing and maintaining the relationships in the meeting between people, including good working relationships. That's one element that's going on in a meeting, because there's a number of things going on. You might be discussing issues or working out a plan with your client, or checking in on that person's goals, or checking in on what services an agency might be providing to your client when they're going to do it. But within that, you want good working relationships to be occurring all the time. Okay, that's absolutely critical. And so it's one of those things that it's like knitting. We're knitting all the time. So if you know what I mean, like I don't want to sound a bit sort of, I don't know what that sounds like, but to me it's like knitting anyway. So you are building and meshing and helping people to communicate for the benefit of the client, but also for just positive and strong and effective and productive working relationships between agencies and between each other. So that's going to be going on in a meeting, right? You need to be aware of that. How well is that going between the participants? As the chairperson, you need to be attuned to that. So you're firing on all cylinders, right? You're going to be listening and watching and firing on all cylinders just to keep an eye on things, okay? And in the end, with practice and experience, you kind of just, things become a little bit more intuitive. You can pick things up. So that's one function that's going on. The other function is the task function. And take note of these two functions, because I think you've got an assessment question around them. Task functions are directed at getting on with the job. Okay, so you've got your agenda items, all right? And your agenda items, things that need to be discussed, that's your business. So discuss those items, and then you've got to work out, okay, where to from here? What are we going to do? Who's going to do what? All right, so Jono, he's got a court case coming up, and so we've got the legal aid here. Court case is coming up in 3 weeks' time, and we don't want any confidential stuff to be shared here. Jono has a right to confidentiality around that. What are we going to do? Okay, legal aid, when do you reckon you can make a meeting? Like legal aid might kick in straight away and say, right, I've got my appointment book here. I've got 3 weeks' time. Really think that we need to meet at least in 10 days' time. That's the task. That's keeping things moving, getting the decision. This is the scenario. What do we need you to do? Righto. Okay, to prepare you for court, Jono, legal aid, are you free and available? You're going to make yourself free to attend that meeting? Is that going to work for you? Like, it's really important that you can make that meeting, okay? And you need to be in the best headspace to be able to have these discussions. Do you think it would be really good if we provided, you know, we've got the mental health practitioner here, and perhaps if we fit you in for some counselling? For example, I'm just talking off the top of my head here, okay? But just that kind of thing to help you to prepare for that, but also maybe after the court case, right, or the hearing, after the hearing to debrief. So the task functions are around getting to the business of stuff, getting things done, okay, getting on with the job. So working on tasks and achieving the group's goals. But also, you've got to remember that this is about your client. Your client is at the centre, and so it's your client's goals and how you're working together in collaboration to support the client in achieving their goals. So those two main functions are going to be going on in a meeting. And they're going to be working at the same time, like this, you know, where you're going to have the maintenance functions, which is around your relationship building and how people are getting on and you know, how people are supporting each other. And then you're going to have that practical stuff doing. And as the chairperson or the facilitator, you need to be pretty mindful of those two things. If you have a situation where your maintenance functions are getting a little bit weak, you've got a couple of workers here, they're not kind of, they're either not seeing eye to eye, or they're not sharing, or you've got somebody who's just not sharing information in the way that you need to, then that's going to have an impact on the group dynamics. That maintenance function, right, is being impacted on. And you might need to think about a strategy of, how am I going to deal with this? How, you know, is this going to weaken how well this meeting is functioning and how well these people as a team, because now you're a team. You know, you're a team working with your client. Right? And your role as the case manager is to bring that collaboration together and to keep it happening, you know, to keep the job getting done, but also to ensure that the working relationships are productive and effective and respectful for the benefit of the client, but for the benefit of the other agencies, because you're a multidisciplinary team. And you'll be calling on each other again because they become part of your work life. So with the communication skills, you know, there's the usual. We've got interpersonal and we've got nonverbal. So the interpersonal skills are all the usual ones around, you know, how you your respectful behaviours, your nonverbal communication, you know, how you send out your messages, your questioning techniques, all of that kind of stuff, being empathetic, being attentive, showing that you're very present, you know, being responsive, all of those sorts of things, being present in the meeting. Your non-verbal communication plays as much a part as does verbal communication. So be observant of your own and other people's body language. We're not always on top of our game. Don't forget too, you've got your client here in the middle, because everything is wrapping around your client and your client's needs. So you must be very much aware and in tune of where your client might be, having some insight into how your client might be feeling, whether they've been sleeping well, eating well, all of that, you know, all of that. And how confident they're feeling, all of that. Active listening is really critical here. It's one of those things that you're going to have to be on your game in terms of really listening to things that are actually being said, but also the things that are not being said. And this is some of this maintenance function. You know, maintenance function is where stuff can go on. It's a living thing. Those relationships are very sort of fluid, but there might be stuff going on that's not being said. So, you know, it's being aware of all of that. So active listening is an essential part of being an effective chairperson or an effective facilitator, really hearing what is being said and taking note. And if you're actively listening, then that actually will come across to other people, and perhaps, you know, other people will demonstrate active listening as well. Any questions around that? Okay, let's move on. Okay, let's have a look at this video of a case conference meeting. It's a simulated child protection case conference from 2017. And what I want you to do, right, bottom line here is identify effective strategies used in this meeting. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. So I want you to take note of what you think of the effective strategies that are used in this case management meeting. And I'm going to stop the recording. I'll put it on pause and we will go to the YouTube clip. Okay, so when we looked at that link, it said that the video wasn't available anymore. So I'm sorry, we'll just have to forget about that one. We'll move on to the rest of the slides. Okay, so the role of the case manager. Let's have a look at this. So the case manager is responsible for ensuring that clear records of planning are kept and that the case management and service delivery and plans include the following. So you've got to have a plan. So a plan is going to be in development. What forms the plan, right, is the preferences and the goals and the priorities that your client has identified. Okay, so that's what the basis of the plan is. And then you link in key stakeholders or service providers that can help to wrap around that client and provide the services to help move their plan and their goals forward. So this is about a journey of empowerment, ideally, for the client. And so records are really critical. You need to keep a clear planning record, and maybe your organisation has templates they prefer you to use. Check in on that. Some do, some might not. Either way, you create a template for yourself, and that you need to keep all those case management plans and service delivery plans and all the meetings to your minutes. Sorry, all the minutes to your meeting. Okay, so you must include who the participants are in terms of coming around your client, service people, support people, what have you. The date and location. The needs, the goals, the aspirations, and the desired outcomes. So this is in your plan, okay? You've got to have very clear what the needs are, your client. So it could be that your client needs accommodation, secure accommodation. It could be that they also need legal support because they have a court hearing coming up. could also be that they need support around mental health and well-being because they're suffering from anxiety and mental health issues, for example. Or, you know, perhaps they have an alcohol issue or a drug abuse issue. Write down what those needs are and then write down what your client's goals are. What are your client's priorities? What do they want to work on first? What do they want to work on second? What are their priorities? What do they hope to achieve with their goals? What does it look, you know, what do they want? What do they hope to achieve? What are their aspirations? And what are their desired outcomes? So it might be my need is, you know, I've got to get out of I've got to get off the streets. I've been sleeping rough. I really want to get into accommodation. My goal is to get into, find some place to live. My aspiration is what I hope to achieve is that I want secure housing. I want a place that I can call my own. And I want to get to know people in my area, you know, and just have a place that's safe and secure for me. I want a home. So identify through discussion, through questioning, what your client's needs are, what their goals are, and what their aspirations and desired outcomes are. And within that, are there any potential risks and barriers? You know, so that's part of the discussion that you have with your client as well. Any potential risks or any potential barriers. Maybe finances are a barrier. You know, perhaps that's something that needs to be looked at. Maybe it could be that living in a particular area is a bit risky for him because your client, he or she, or they might fall back into behaviours or social associations or social groups that they want to break away from. Maybe it's for their best chances that they move away from that or that they move away from their family. Maybe in fact, the family dynamics are quite dysfunctional for your client and are part of their risk factors. So those sorts of things need to be identified and talk through. And perhaps, you know, with that, perhaps another service that might be really important for your client at some point is perhaps counselling. So anyway, it's really important to identify any risks or barriers that might actually be inhibiting for your client in terms of achieving these goals. And it might actually help in when you have that discussion, to maybe have a look at what their goals are in comparison to the risks, weigh them up. Do we need to adjust the goal? Is this goal, do we need to take it over a longer period of time so that you've got time to build more resilience or whatever it is, whatever it might be, you know, so helping to keep that goal realistic for your client. For any potential risks and barriers, you need to identify any strategies to overcome or manage those risks or barriers. And it might be around adjusting the goal. It's really important that goals are manageable. You need success. Your client is going to need to have, you know, achievements that they can relate to. And so those successes that happen for them. Considerations too of cultural, social, economic, and any other relevant factors. So any cultural considerations, any social, any economic, they're the things we touched on before. Any other relevant factors, including the person's own support and resources. Ensuring that people do have supports in place and that they do have resources that they need, and identifying if they don't, then where can they be accessed? So you have your agreed goals and what your objectives are and criteria for measuring achievements. So sometimes in here, you've got SMART goals, where you've got goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So you keep a framework around those goals so to keep them realistic. You know, is there something that you can, you know, realistically achieve in a particular amount of time with the supports in place? What sort of resources do we need? And you know, how often will we check in on how this is going? How often will we check in on progress? And maybe when we, you know, I could circle back here to those informal meetings, maybe in terms of checking in on progress around some of the goals, right? Maybe that's just can be done in informal meetings, checking on somebody and then just take a note and put it on their case note. And that could be part of, you know, checking in on progress and reviewing progress. You need to think about sort of strategies around collecting information to monitor and review progress. So, you know, do you get a report from each of the service providers? How are you going to do that? If you were going to do that, you also clearly and obviously would need to have, you know, your informed consent, signed informed consent to share information from your client. And that would all need to be in their file as well, their case file. So you need to sort of think about, okay, what sort of information do we need around, and how we're going to collect it to monitor and review progress and to evaluate what the outcomes are. Because it might mean that some goals need to be revised or changed. So, you know, implementation strategies and services, the services that are there that have come around the table, the agreed lines of communication. And this is something that's really important, you know. Will people share their email addresses? What about communication with the client? Would it be better, you know, will the client mainly deal with you as their case manager around being a main source of information? Will we just meet every month? And at every month, will we provide a feedback report on our client's progress and review their case plan and their goals? So, or will we meet weekly to do that? Will we meet online or will we meet face to face? Is it always preferable that everyone attends those meetings, or will those reports be forwarded to the case manager, and will the case manager sit down with the client and talk about them with the client? So you need to just talk those sorts of things through, and the time frame and review date, and then everybody has to sign off on the plan. Any thoughts around that? Does that seem to work in with what you do, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the companies kind of like work different or in different angles. As I said, I'm more the house manager in terms of I worry about the kids and take them to school, take them to the medical appointment, like the guardian kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or the parent image. So I'm more in the day by day, caring for every detail or things that are going on in their life.
Would you be all right if I share how it's done where I work? Is that all right?
We'd be happy to.
I don't like to interrupt, that's all. So that's why I co-lead. So like when my boss goes on leave, I step into her role. So I also work with children, but younger kids. And our meetings tend to be with DCJ.
Who spell that out? Department of Justice, is it?
Yes. Yeah, DCJ. Child psychologists, the schools. We've just had kids suspended. So again, we've got their cult because they're Aboriginal. So apart from his psychologist, the OTs, we've also got an elder. We've got his cultural mentor that also does that. And there's a clear plan in place. So there's the agenda, then there's like a task. So there's a list of tasks that have to be completed before that next meeting. And there's a person assigned to each task. So, and then there's also a person assigned for follow-up. So one person's responsible for following up and making sure those tasks are completed. If they haven't been completed, why not? But just for that accountability.
So can I just ask there, sorry, Danielle, can I just ask, really good information to hear. Thank you for sharing it. But does the person who follows up the tasks, is that before the next meeting?
Definitely, yep.
Okay, so they keep things on track. So you've got somebody, so that would be what, the case manager?
It's usually the case manager. If the case manager can't do it, it's passed down to either myself or the other.
Okay. So that's a role generally for the case manager, folks, following up on tasks, keeping the business and the work moving ahead.
And the case manager will also delegate as well.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So if she can't do it, she'll delegate those tasks to someone else.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Danielle. Keep going. Yep.
And then if there's any concerns, for example, then they'll let us know if a ROSH reports have to be completed. So that is like child safety concerns.
Right. And I would say that because you're dealing with children, right, whether, you know, is that one way that you keep an eye, is that a risk management approach?
It is similar to a risk management approach, except we remove the families out of it. The families are not part of it.
Because of the risk factors?
Because of the risk. The risks are too high.
Okay. So in terms of that child being the client,
yes,
who represents that child in a meeting?
So it's usually myself and the child psychologist.
Okay. And so the people representing the child in that meeting, is that somebody who has a relationship with that child, a professional relationship with that child?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So it's not somebody who just blows in.
I've been working with this child in particular for 1.5 years.
Okay. So you have a relationship with that child.
Yeah. And the psychologist has been working with her for 5 years.
Okay.
So it's
so these are people who the child knows. What I'm getting at is that it's not somebody that every time there's a case management meeting, there are new people that this child needs to deal with.
No, not always, but sometimes, especially if there's been hospital admissions, there'll be a doctor will be invited along, or they've also got like a physiotherapist that might also join in on that meeting as well, just to work out what that child's triggers are.
Okay, fine. And do you mind me asking these questions? Because I just think hopefully it helps you all to understand. If you can visualize what a meeting might look like from what Danielle is saying and what that case plan might look like. Danielle was really clear in saying you've got a list of tasks, who's going to do what, and when by, and the role of the case manager is to keep on track of that. And then you come to a meeting and there might be, depending on what's going on for that child, there are regular people that child or that client has a relationship with, the support worker, and in this case, the psychologist as well, but there might be other people like from the hospital system, GP, psychologist. If that's the case, prior to a meeting, does that client get to meet? Would you ensure that that client meets that person beforehand, knows that that person is coming?
With this particular child, because of their anxiety, I'll actually do like what's called a social story. I don't know if you guys know what a social story is. And we'll talk through any concerns that they might have, if they actually want that person to be at that meeting, because again, my role is to be that child's voice, help that child have a voice.
Right.
You know, so if they don't want that person at the meeting, then I'll put that forward. Hey, look, they're not comfortable with that person being at the meeting. These are the reasons why. Is there a way we can make that happen, basically? And if not, how do we then navigate that to help this child to feel as comfortable as possible
and safe? Yeah, sure.
Safe, yeah, and reassure.
Okay, cool. Ruth, yes. You're on mute, Ruth.
I was going to ask, following up on your story, Danielle, how old does a child have to be, but it can actually be part of the meeting? Because you also deal with very young children, don't you?
Yeah.
So when do they actually get a voice for themselves? At what age?
Look, all of our children are encouraged to have a voice, and usually it's the DCJ.
But you wouldn't say a child at 3 would have a voice, or 4. When does a child actually get a voice for themselves? I know you are representing them.
A child at 3 does have a voice. It's about the case manager actually, I guess, being a voice for that child and voicing what that child is wanting. You know, so
I didn't think they would be able to make decisions for themselves. I mean, at that age.
They definitely don't make decisions. No.
Yeah.
Don't make decisions, but the case manager's role in that particular situation is to actually be an advocate for that child and to, I guess, have that best interest of that child. So, for example, a 3-year-old, for example, who comes from a history of trauma, I won't go into details because it could trigger some people.
Yeah.
They don't understand that trauma. All they know is that they've been taken from home. They're now with strangers and they want to go back home, even though they've been hurt so badly.
That's actually very common, isn't it? That is the only place I know.
That's all they know. Yeah. So a case manager's role obviously is to help the child to understand and to process what they've been through, but also to learn to accept that they can't go back home, you know, and soon, like, eventually those children, especially, I don't work with the under 5s, but with the under 5s, it's a different process completely.
I mean, it's an interesting point that you raise. Good question, Ruth, because I think it just sort of goes to show that case management, I mean, if you're dealing with, you know, yes, we talk about clients, we do tend to think of generally our default position is clients being adults, but in fact, clients are across the lifespan. And so case management, again, is a highly specialist sort of thing. It's moving into that area of being a very specialist kind of activity or professional role, because depending on the lifespan of your client, you've got developmental issues, you've got legal issues relevant to life stage,
police, child protection,
and age, and all of that kind of stuff. And so, you know, there are specialist areas that you can move into as a case manager.
Can I ask one more question? If you're having the child as the client that has a voice for themselves, I'm just thinking, is it appropriate to have them in that meeting with all the information being discussed over their head? Or would that create anxiety in the child? Because, you know, if you have your own child, you would never take them to a meeting because you feel like that would only upset them. The adult makes the decision.
I see where you're going with this, actually.
So I'm just wanting to know, I know we care about the child as being the centre and you're person-centred, but I'm just thinking, is it appropriate for them to be part of that actual meeting? That's the question.
It's the child's choice.
Okay, but see, can a child really make that choice at, say, 5 or, say, 6?
If they want to be a part of that meeting, we make it happen, but then obviously the people who are running that meeting adapt it and make it age appropriate.
Okay, right.
So again, a whole sort of a whole skills base around that, Ruth.
Yeah.
But that actually, I mean, thanks for all of that information and for having that discussion and sharing, Danielle, and for your question, because I think it sort of puts it into that that real basis for us around what does it look like at hand. But it actually connects to the next slide, which I thought I'd move on to, if it's okay with that. But I mean, is there anything else you'd like to add, Danielle?
I just hope Danny doesn't think I've taken over. I'm so sorry, Danny.
Oh, not at all. Don't worry about it. Like, I love the discussion situation and all giving their points of view. I think what you were saying, the social story is key for this as well when they're little kids, because it gives them a little bit of more like examples in an easy and more appropriate age understanding why they're there, why they're not safe home, what it's who, even like, for example, when they come into a placement like mine, we put pictures of the workers that are gonna be with them, so that they like hobbies, and like they like soccer, they like foodie, they like biking, they like swimming. So like we are constantly trying to aim for the child to always feel safe, but actually the voice is key, because of their choices and the child rights.
Exactly.
Child rights. Yeah.
And our children are very good at pointing out that they have rights. For example, if you guys are laugh, okay, one of our kids got suspended, okay, but as a rule, there's no TV, no tech, no Wi-Fi, nothing before 3 o'clock. He's pointed out, hey, his part of his child rights is to be able to do things that he likes. You know,
they
so
know too much the rights.
We had to navigate.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one.
I had to remove the TV in the end, but
yeah, it is an interesting one. But I mean, I think it is correct that we do operate within a framework of human rights. If we are working with children, then we do need to be aware that we are operating within a framework of the rights of the child as well, front and foremost, and knowing what those are and working within that. But it does raise that question around, which is our next slide, around considering the impact of values. And because people have got different feelings and different opinions. Yes, Ruth? You're on mute, Ruth.
I'm interrupting again, but is there a difference in rights to a child, to adult? It have to make sense, but I'm wanting to know where the difference is, because a child can't really make decisions for itself, so he can't make rights. Like in your case, Daniel, when he wanted the TV, he has to have that right forfeited. But
so in this child situation, he is right.
Yeah.
Rights. We can't touch his stuff, so he worked out that the PlayStation cord fits the TV and actually will run the TV, and that's his cord.
Yeah.
We can't touch the cord, but the TV belongs to Catholic care, so therefore we can remove the TV.
So that's how you work the right situation, that situation.
Well, I think it's
so I'm just wanting to know how many rights does a child actually have? Even that's a hard question.
Our role is to teach children natural consequences. You know, if they get suspended from school, they've got to understand that
absolutely,
you know, there's a privilege, like these things are privileges, and they're not a right. Sure. There's a difference.
That's right. Yeah, that's why you have to train a child up and discipline them. But the thing is, when they're speaking about their rights, it is getting more difficult, isn't it? Because that's what they're taught.
It's probably worthwhile in the context of case management and the areas that case management can go into, in terms of service provision, life stage, and what have you, different departments and all that kind of stuff. It would be worth your while looking up the rights of the child. You do need to know over the course of your...
The difference between...
If I can, if you want to put your email or something in, I can email you through the rights. I can just take a screenshot of all of that.
You can look it up. You can Google it. You can Google it now, the rights of the child.
Yeah, because I just wondered how much different it is to the rights of an adult. Yeah, okay, I will. I'll have to search that one up.
I think it'd be a really good thing for everyone to do, actually, because in community services, you will be dealing with children. Like, I mean, some of you might choose to. You will need to know the rights of the child, and the rights of Indigenous people and human rights.
And when those rights change between a child and adult, it must be at 18, I guess, or
I would 16 say so.
Or 15. I don't know.
I think it would be. It could. Well, that's another good thing to find out. So good conversation. Thank you very much. We're going to move on from this one and move into a good segue, which is around values. Considering the impacts of values. I mean, sometimes we are dealing with complex things in case management, complex values. So you're needing to be aware of your own values and how they might affect other participants in the case management process. You know, it's about avoiding conflicts. It's about avoiding misunderstandings. It's about being mindful of that maintenance role within a meeting, you know, that stuff around maintaining positive, productive relationships, professional relationships for the benefit of each other and for the benefit of the client. And, you know, the thing is that values can be different. And sometimes maybe we make assumptions around that people do share the same values or share the same understanding around a values base, and that isn't always the case, as we know. So it is really important to be aware of your own values, and I think the discussion that we've just had is a perfect example of that, the concept of child's rights, and, you know, that there is a document that we need to be mindful of in community services around the rights of the child. There are reasons for that, and so it'd be interesting for you to consider that. What does that mean for you? And it can actually help you to decide, is this an area? No, I mean, child protection, for instance, is not an area for everyone to work in. It's for a whole range of different reasons, obvious reasons, I would say. I think it's a highly complex, highly emotional area. Some people it suits better than others. But the thing is that case management, community services and case management is so broad that, you know, there is a place for everyone. So you don't have to be suited to every kind of single sort of role or situation. I mean, there are case management services supporting young people who are released from incarceration so that they don't go down the pathway of homelessness because it's such a risk. So, you know, there's a whole lot of considerations, and with that comes your own values and your own beliefs and what is the right fit for you, you know. And so when you're in a case management situation and in a meeting, being mindful of that within the, you know, the group dynamics around maintenance, the maintenance function is an important one. So as a case manager, it could well be that you may experience a conflict where a client's values are in direct contradiction to your own. And so, you know, you need to have strategies to think about, okay, how would I deal with that? You know, how would I mediate that? And if it was to happen in the context of a case meeting and you're in a position of having to mediate or manage different points of view or different considerations, that is a particular skill set. And so it's really important to, you know, consider what strategies you can use in managing difference of opinions. So coming to, you know, whether people are going to, you know, accommodate, whether they're going to, you know, whether there's somebody who really wants to dominate that view and have their view dominate, whether there's compromise, what you're going to lead with in terms of trying to come to some resolution and move the discussion on. And it could well be that, you know, there are times where you say, look, I'm sorry, around this, we have to agree to disagree. But if it comes down to it compromising or having an impact on an action that has to come out of a meeting, then you might need to sort of, you know, think about another way of how we're going to get a solution to this. Somebody might need to really compromise here, the best interests of the client, or, you know, for ethical reasons, or, you know, following organisational policies and procedures. If you're having a conflict around values or a values situation with a client, that's, you know, that's another thing too. So one thing to consider is to consider what your client's capacities are. So move to a strengths-based approach. So where you unpack the situation and, you know, it's like what Danielle said in terms of helping children to understand consequence, the concept of consequence. And perhaps that's a strategy that you can use in terms of unpacking a situation with a client to sort of go through, okay, what are the strengths here? Are there consequences to certain actions? What are the skills and abilities and attributes that you can bring that your client can bring to help, offset a particular path of action, particular value? In terms of identifying these goals and strategies, a strengths-based approach is the one that would most commonly be used to help the client to identify what are the assets that you actually do have and you do bring. And it can be very common that they may not even be aware. They might not be aware that they have any. And so that can take some time to sort of unpack that. What are the skills and attributes that you can bring to this situation when you are working out with your client what their needs are, what their goals are, and what the strategies are to move ahead? Let's have a break. I've gone over time. It's just after 8:05. We'll go to just after 5:15, and we'll see you then. Okay. Doug, so we just sort of covered stuff around values, considering your own values, and difference in values between you and your client, and some strategies around, well, how to actually develop that, not develop that, sorry, how to deal with that, being aware of it. And also considering the capacity of participants, including your clients, in terms of developing goals and collecting information from people around their availability, the resources they can bring, skills and experience of service providers as well. And, within that, paying attention to things like differences in beliefs and values and experience that people might bring. We're going to be moving on to using a case management approach. So basically with case management, your choice of approach theoretically should be made in collaboration with your client and with other relevant participants. What your role is to translate theoretical information into practical guidelines and agreements about how you will work together. So that is what you're doing. You're having those discussions around where your client is at, what their needs are, what their goals are, what their aspirations are, what their priorities are. Bringing together other stakeholders, other service providers, people who your client has agreed to be there from your own support network, if that's what they agree to, and agreement between what other services or agencies might be called on as part of their case plan to develop goals and actions with them to develop their case plan. So and with that, you need to consider, what are the resources that you're bringing together, these combinations of things. What are the resources that are required? What are the resources that people have? What can they bring to the table? What does their time look like? All of that kind of stuff. And basically develop an agreement about how you're going to work together. What sort of communication strategies will you have? What kind of time can people bring to this arrangement and bring to working with your client? Can they meet with your client 3 times a week? Can it be once a month? What have you? Working through those things, being very clear. What is it that people can bring? What are the resources that they have to bring? And also getting the agreement, the understanding and the agreement from your client, that commitment around being an active participant in that process.
Talking about this, so I've got a question, because my client's case manager says, hey, I'm going to see you next week, but then she cancels and doesn't follow through.
Oh, that's really
empty promises. So how do you, I guess, get people to follow through on what they make.
That's actually really unfortunate to hear. And I mean, it depends on how you want to facilitate that meeting. But I guess if it was me, and maybe it just, I don't know, if it was me, I would probably, at the beginning of that meeting when we come together, ask for their commitment. Just say, I need you to make these. Are we in agreement that we are committed to maintaining the appointments that we've made, right, and the commitments that we've made around this?
Okay, yeah.
And if you can't, like, what do you do? Like, put it to them. If it turns out that you cancel 2 meetings in a row, for instance, for an example, I don't know. If it turns out that you can't do that, right, then how will you deal with that?
Mm.
Will you move it on to somebody else? Can you recommend somebody else?
Okay, so we can ask for those suggestions.
You could do, and you could actually develop, what you could do is develop a common set of understandings, a set of common understandings, sort of like a protocol between you. And it could be, I mean, some places have got case management policies around this, that the case management kind of stuff, there needs to be an agreed set of protocols between the all the participants around the role that they're playing and what they're bringing to it, and they make that commitment and they sign off on it.
Yeah.
And if they find that they can't honour that commitment, then they have a commitment to let people know, to let you know as the case manager, and to suggest that it's passed on to another person.
Mm.
Right? So they take active responsibility for that right from the start. I think the situation that you've suggested, I think that's unacceptable myself.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that it is perfectly reasonable in my book, right, that at the beginning of that partnership, this is a partnership that everyone is forming. And so it's okay for that partnership to actually take the shape of a written agreement.
Okay.
And this is where some organisations specify, maybe they do want you to enter a written agreement. That's part of their policy.
Okay.
But that's something that you could do.
I'll go back to our policy and just see what the process is.
And, maybe if there's not a clear process, perhaps you could suggest the policy be reviewed.
Okay, yeah.
Because in the end, that kind of stuff is actually also contravening person-centred care.
And it's affecting the young person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is my suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Can I mention something? I think that it's really sad. Even I always have said that I don't want to be a caseworker because I feel like caseworker never have time for the kids. Like what you're saying, if a caseworker doesn't come to see, and I'm sorry that I'm saying this, if anybody wants to be a caseworker, I'm just saying I hope it doesn't go that way, because it just affects so much the kid that they're waiting for that person to come.
Sure.
And then they don't arrive, and then it happens one, and then it happens again. Or even I have had a caseworker that I actually asked for her to be removed from the caseworker team to not care for this or be the caseworker of this young person because she would not only not come, but constantly remind her or mention that she was prioritizing another child over her.
Well, it sounds like you made a good decision to remove her. But I think that actually these examples that you give in actually do feed in very clearly. They're very practical examples of choosing an approach to work. What kind of approach are you going to use? And you might need to combine a couple of approaches using things like developing a mutual understanding or a protocol around to actually put in writing, get people to commit. This is what we commit to. We commit to attending meetings once a month, whatever it is, right? We commit to honouring and following through the things that we said that we would. If we have to miss a meeting, this is the process that will be followed. We will find a replacement or whatever it is, right? But that is an approach, a case management approach to be using. And so, to set up the structure.
Yeah. So I know if ever I can't attend, then I have a youth worker that
who can attend. Yeah. So that would be good to actually put that in a protocol. So you develop a very clear partnership. This is what our partnership looks like. And so then people own it.
Yeah.
But then you get people to sign it.
Right.
And then you give them all a copy. And that's one approach that you could take. And that's an example of how case managers need to use more than one approach. So when we come down to complex case management, we're very much aware, as you would be aware, that many people now, it is more the norm that people are affected by multiple conditions and multiple issues, and they will present with more than one issue. And so they come with complex needs. And so they require more support from multiple organisations across different service sectors. And this is very common. So this is where your multidisciplinary team comes in. So coordinating multiple services is essential to stop people from falling through the gaps, and to avoid overlooking significant needs and problems that your client might have, and to avoid overwhelming and confusing clients. So often with case management these days, you are coordinating multiple services on behalf of your client, which is what we've actually been talking about, because case management in itself is, it's pretty difficult, I think, to avoid the complexity, really. So case management provides opportunities to coordinate a wide range of interventions and a wide range of supports and a wide range of services. So there are some barriers. If there are barriers and issues that come up, that people with complex needs often experience barriers to engaging with and accessing services. That can be an issue sometimes. Cultural factors may also have an impact. There could be cultural factors, certainly for First Nations people, but also not just First Nations people. It can be cultural factors for other cultural backgrounds or ethnicities as well. Could be cultural factors in terms of family situations. Also, past history might also play a part. An organisation may present barriers associated with its name, its location, and its appearance. And, this is actually something that can be really significant, that maybe the organisation itself is a barrier and triggers people, that just because of their name or because of the organisation's history, because of where it is. Maybe the organisation is located in an area that is not conducive to the client seeking support. Their confidentiality might be at risk. Or there might be other people who are accessing the service that they don't want to come into contact with. Or it could be the appearance of the organisation. So, these are things that sometimes that we don't think about. I remember down here in Melbourne, there used to be called an organisation that was called, it was a family support organisation, quite a big one. But it was called ISIS Care, ISIS. And they had to change the name. ISIS stood for something, and I don't know what it stood for, but it was for years and years and years. It was called ISIS Care. And after, a certain amount of time of various things happening in the world, politically, and also happening in our societies down here in Melbourne, we're a very multicultural society, it was deemed absolutely critical that that organisation removed its name and changed its name because of the relationship it had to, the association that some people made to, terrorism activities and terrorist groups. So they had to change their name. So, that's just one example, but that's fairly drastic, but still an organisation can present barriers itself. Other barriers around and other issues can be around locating appropriate services for your client in terms of meeting their needs and finding out what each service offers. So you might need to do quite a bit of research around, depending on where you are. If you're in a geographic location that is not serviced very well, and many rural areas, that is precisely the case. We know that services are predominantly in the urban areas. But, if you are in a rural area and you need particular services, mental health services or what have you, or a variety, a multidisciplinary team, it might be very difficult for you to be able to access them. And it could well be that, services can be accessed, but it might mean travelling. So maybe that's a situation that needs to be looked at. What kind of resources are required to support your client in accessing the services that they need. And it could well be that as the case manager, part of your role is to, get your client there and get your client back. How do you meet for meetings? All of that kind of thing. So these are complex things that are real in our country. And maybe you live in an area that it doesn't have good access to services. I mean, people are really impacted by that. So that is an issue. In terms of principles and practices for managing complex case management, make sure some of the things to consider is to make sure your client is an active partner in identifying needs and goals and in planning, reviewing and evaluating services. I think this, to me, is at the heart of it. Like, yes, it's about person-centred care, but also it's about getting your clients, continued commitment and supporting them in their continued commitment around their journey. And it can be, I'm convinced that case management at its heart is hopefully around a journey of empowerment. And one way to keep or to grow your client's empowerment is to keep them connected to the plan, actively connected to this plan, which is about theirs they've agreed with, and what the goals are, and monitoring their own goals and monitoring their own progress and monitoring their own planning and changing the planning or being involved in the planning and reviewing and evaluating the services. Might be with a service for a while and it was really good at the start, but perhaps after a while they found that actually they've moved on and they don't need that service in the same way. Well, that's a good thing. Is that a good thing? Anyway, I mean, so keeping your client at the centre of that and empowering them and working directly in collaboration with them. So you're focusing on the needs of the whole person. So you look at that holistic approach, not just a clinical condition, and how they feel about things, what's going on in other parts of their life, and what else is happening for them, and how that impacts on their plan, and keeping mindful of that. Making sure that individual service plans meet individual needs, so that we don't take this templated approach, the one size fits all. It's a case-by-case approach that each plan is individual to the person that you're case managing. You must ensure the service plans are culturally appropriate. Danielle raised that before when she said that there was an elder present. I assumed, you don't have to clarify this, but my assumption was that you meant a First Nations elder. Maybe you meant that, maybe you didn't.
Yes, I did. Yeah, no, I did.
So, that can be the case, certainly with First Nations people. But it's not just about First Nations cultural competency and appropriateness. We come from a very multiculturally diverse nation. And so it's really important to take cultural customs, cultural nuances, all of that into consideration when planning. Don't make assumptions that how we interpret things, how we do things, or how, you know, the organisation does things is going to be received, comprehended, understood, and preferred by everyone. It's really critical that you ensure that service plans identify very clear, measurable outcomes. Right, very clear. So as Danielle said, you know, and everything they have, these are the tasks, and this is what needs to be done, and this is who's going to do it. Be really clear about what the outcomes are, and that you can measure them. What does success look like? What does progress look like? And strategies for meeting those outcomes, and for supporting your client, and for supporting your case management team, and how you're going to monitor progress and evaluate the outcomes. What's changed? You know, what's the journey look like? What's it been like?
I know when, I guess, the case manager is monitoring how the client's going in their meeting their goals, for example, they all have, like, our clients have got different goals for different things, but they'll actually ask the client what they think that they've achieved,
right,
what they need to work on, and then they'll actually give that like a percentage. And by the end of the month, they get this like a graph, basically. And then the clients can actually see their progress, basically.
Okay. And is that received well by the clients, that visual representation of progress?
Some case managers do it really, really well. So they actually color code it. So it's got bright colors and the kids love it. Or there's another case manager that does it with pictures. Okay. So like it's like a roadmap, basically. So koala would be at the start, and then at the end there'd be like a wombat. Okay. There's different.
But yeah, I think that's a really good idea, actually. I think that people do respond to visual cues. We're a very visual society. But if people can see, you know, like we can tell the story, there is always the story. People can tell their story, right? But being able to represent progress in a visual way is, it can be really great, and it can be very, very effective. But also thinking about points of celebration, you know, as well.
I know kids get that, because one particular kid loves animals, so they get like a stuffed toy. So whatever animal that represents their progress, the case manager will go out and buy that animal for that child.
Right. Well, that's really great.
It's a really positive, and it works great.
Yeah. I mean, if you're dealing with adults, it's sort of, I mean, this is the same for us in our life now, you know, like every now and then you need to give yourself a prize, you know. So in terms of a case plan with a client, you know, you can do the same thing, you know, say to somebody, you know, do something nice for yourself. When you achieve this or what have you, whatever it is, what's something nice that you'd like to do for yourself, you know? Is there something that you could do to basically give yourself a prize? Because we all need those sorts of acknowledgements. So anyway, they're just some thoughts. So with you, if you're the case manager, you are the person who is coordinating all of this. That is your role. You're the primary point of contact. Everything comes through you. Everything comes to you. And you need to manage that and coordinate that. Organise and plan for the meetings. Organise the meetings and facilitate and manage and share those meetings. Keep track of the plans. Keep track of the actions that people said that they would do as a result of those meetings, and also with the case management plans. In between meetings, it's your job to get in touch with people and find out how they're going. Are things being achieved? If not, why not? What can we do to support you? Do things need to change? So plans need to be, it has to be sort of some flexibility in plans, I would imagine, you know, some kind of flex and give, so that it is responsive to changing needs and circumstances. And always things need to be monitored. Any questions around that? Okay. So monitoring, review and evaluation is the last thing that we're going to talk about. It's fairly sort of, you know, so if we look at the first one, social research and evaluation methods, you know, I've already sort of said that when we're evaluating case management and service delivery, the question sort of needs to be, the question usually is, well, what's working, what's not working, and what needs to be changed? Or are we achieving what we set out to achieve? And are the outcomes good or bad? Okay, they're the things that we want to go, that we want to collect information on. So you need to collect information and data from your client and from the service providers too. And that's, we just refer to that as social research and evaluation, because you're just collecting that data. What's working, what's not. Collecting feedback. It's continuous improvement. It's really important and good practice that we do seek feedback and collect it for our own practice and for continuous improvement. So that could be about anything. It could be about how you're managing meetings, what communication lines are like, you know, all of that. It can be about the plan, but can also be about the process around the whole case management coordination process. And part of collecting feedback, sometimes it can be good at the end of every meeting, or not, maybe not at the end of every meeting, but perhaps every 3 months or what have you, that you just sort of send out a little feedback sheet and say, how do you think things are going for it? You know, are things working in the way that you feel that they could be? Are there things that we could do to improve that? You're the one who's coordinating it. So asking for that feedback around your coordination, whether things can be done in a different way or whether they're okay, is probably a good thing to do. So it doesn't need to be a formal way. You know, you can just check in with people and say, look, you know, I'm just emailing these things out to you a week in advance. Is that okay? You know, or do you prefer to get it earlier? Or do you just want to get it on the day at the meeting? So, you know, you can just have that very informal kind of feedback. But getting feedback is really important about your practice and around how you're going about things. Important to include all people who will be affected by change in identifying what exactly should be changed and why, and how the change should be introduced. So, you know, if you do it as a collective, it means that you've got collective ownership, and that sort of increases people's commitment to the process, and the likelihood that change will succeed. So just remember that everything is done in collaboration, and it's good to keep that collaborative approach. When we come to evidence-based practice in community services, we only work to an evidence base. So we work to tried and tested methods and strategies for providing services, supporting clients, and addressing needs. And that evidence we need to get from our clients themselves, what works for them. We need to, and what doesn't work for them. We get it from our colleagues, you know, from service providers as well. What are the things, the strategies that are used that we know works or are the most successful? What are the ones that tend to put people in a vulnerable position? So you must work to an evidence base. With that could also be formal research. You might want to read up on, you know, formal research and new trends emerging and all of that kind of stuff. All of that is part of your professional practice. You do need to be aware that strategies, services and methods that you choose should be properly researched and demonstrated to be effective. So you need to sort of do some research around that through formal means or through checking in with colleagues and network and other professionals. Documentation is really important. You must comply with legal and ethical requirements for privacy and confidentiality, as well as with your own organisation's policies and procedures. It's also important to make sure that records and documents are accurate, they're up to date, and that the information contained in them is relevant, clearly presented and objective, and that they can be read. If you are handwriting things, people need to be able to read what you're writing. It also needs to be objective, okay? So, you've got to, I think writing case notes is a skill. You do need to ensure that the information you put in there is relevant. Don't put in anything that is not relevant to it. It's very clearly presented, very clearly written, and it's objective. And then closing a case. Cases do close. It's very rare that a case will go on for, forever and a day. Some situations, the case management might go on for extended periods of time, but for various reasons, closing a case does happen. Planning the exit should include informing everyone involved and discussing whether the client is to be referred or transferred to another service. And so there are various reasons why there could be case closure. It could be that the client has just said, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm happy with where things are at, or I can't commit to this anymore. It could be that your client has moved away. That happens sometimes, that they relocate, and so it's not feasible for that service to come together anymore. And in which case, you need to have that discussion with the client to sort of see, okay, do we transfer this service and see if we can develop a case management approach elsewhere, or what have you. But everybody, for whatever reason, it could be that a client passes away. That can happen too, in which case the case will be closed.
I have another example.
Sorry?
I have another example of closing case.
You do?
Restoration.
You can tell us about that.
I was about to say the same thing, Danny.
Yeah, I did the process of restoration of a girl 12 years old last year, whereas at the end of the day, so I managed her for 11 months and did all the process with the mother, and all the mother was involved in drugs, but she did rehab, so we support her doing her rehabilitation and start creating family contact, and then family contact without supervision, and then the mother will come over, stay at the house, and just did the whole process until they reconnected, and then the child went back home, which is a huge achievement for
very
a
huge
child in out-of-home care.
Yeah.
And and she's now, next month is 1 year that she moved there, and seems like things are going good.
These are good stories.
Yeah.
So we call that restoration. Thank you very much.
Another example apart from restoration is because our model is permanency care. So whole goal is restoration, but if not, then other options would be for like a permanent foster placement. So we've just recently supported a young child who was only 7 into a foster placement, which we've recently heard is going extremely well. Good. And the family is now adopting her.
Okay. Well, these are good stories. These are other examples of where case management comes to an end. There's a range of different reasons, and in all of those cases, people need to be informed. All the records need to be up to speed, and the case will be closed. That's actually all I have for you around this unit. Any other questions that people have? No? Okay. Look, I'm going to leave it there, but as we wrap up, I just want to say it's just been a privilege to work alongside you all, such dedicated individuals, and your commitment to serving the community. It's truly inspiring. Keep carrying that passion forward. I encourage you to do that. And remember that the impact you make extends far beyond what you see. We do need you in community services, so continue with your studies, and I wish you all the best farewell for now. May your journey continue to be filled with meaningful connections and positive change. Take care, everyone. It's been a pleasure teaching you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Michelle. Thank
wish
you.
you
And
all
all
the
the
best.
best to you too.
All the
Thank
best.
you very much.
Yes,
Okay.
Will we
you
see you
later.
next week?
No, there is a new teacher coming on board, Danielle, next week. I sort of gave an explanation of that at the beginning of the class. So,
Oh, sorry, I wasn't here.
yeah, no, that's okay. Just reiterating that there will be a new teacher starting a new unit next week, and there is a new teacher.
We wish you
Yes,
very
Danny?
much well as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I
Okay,
wish you all the best.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Okay, Danny, I might put us into a breakout room if you wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I'm going to pause the recording now.